Hey, welcome to Church Online. I'm so glad you're joining us this weekend. Do me a favor, wherever you're watching this or whenever you're watching this, hit the share button in the bottom left corner. At Christ Church, we believe that Jesus is for everyone, and we want to make sure that Church Online is for every single person and all of your online friends. So hitting the share button helps us reach even more people, and I would encourage you to do that. We're in a series right now called Luke on Location, and we've got tons of resources available on our website, christchurch.com. You can click the resource tab, and there you'll find things like a Luke on Location workbook. You'll find things like a weekend discussion guide for this weekend's message. You'll find things like a gospel reading plan. I'd love for you to take advantage of all of those resources on our website. Again, christchurch.com, there under the resource tab. I also want to let you know that we have entered into a season of regathering at our Clay County and our Effingham campus. All of our regathering information is available again on our website. I'd love for you to check that out. Again, christchurch.com. But we would love to see you on the weekends at one of our physical campuses. Well, let's hop into Church Online this weekend.
my joy. You are my song. You are the well, the one I'm drawing from. You are my refuge, my whole life long. Where else would I go? Surely my God is the strength of my soul. Your love defends me. Your love defends me. And when I feel like I'm all alone, your love defends me. Your love defends me. Yeah. Day after day, night after night, I will remember you're with me in this fight. Although the battle, it rages on, the war is already won. I know the war is already won. Surely my God is the strength of my soul. Your love defends me. Your love defends me. And when I feel like I'm all alone, your love defends me. Your love defends me. We sing hallelujah. You're my portion, my salvation. Hallelujah. Surely my God is the strength of my soul. Your love defends me. Your love defends me. And when I feel like I'm all alone, your love defends me. Your love defends me. Surely my God is the strength of my soul. Your love defends me. Your love defends me. And when I feel like I'm all alone, oh, your love defends me. Your love defends me. We sing hallelujah. You're my portion, my salvation. Hallelujah. You're my portion, my salvation. Hallelujah. You're my portion, my salvation.
One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, 'The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.' On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching. A man was there whose right hand had been shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, 'Get up and stand in front of everyone.' So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, 'I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy it?' He looked around at them all and then said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. Greetings. Thank you for sharing your time with us at Christ Church. We are continuing our study titled Luke on Location, which today will take us to Luke chapter 6, where we're going to see two stories of Jesus and his interaction with the teachers of the law, the Pharisees of his day. The first one is in the Galilean hillside. He and his disciples are traveling through the country, and they're picking grain. We'll pick that story up, and then we'll move to the second one, which happens in a synagogue. The location of it is not specified. It could have been at Magdala, along the western side of the Sea of Galilee. Could have been at Capernaum. Could have been Bethsaida or Chorazin or some other location. Today's stories are not really so much about location as they are the timing of them. Both of them, arranged by Luke as he lays out this material, are meant to communicate a point that Jesus is engaging in his ministry. He is countering this self-righteousness, this religious, be right with God based upon your obedience to Sabbath law. Jesus' popularity at this point in the story is on the rise. He's performing miracles all over the countryside. There are huge crowds of people gathering to hear from him and to see what it is that he might do next. Onlookers are being called out of the crowd to come and follow him. They're being established as future leaders in the movement of his kingdom. Jesus is different. It's obvious at this point that he's different. His take on the law, his interpretation of the regulations is much different than other leaders of his day. And it's very unsettling with the religious authorities. Sabbath law, in particular, is going to become a focus point of this conflict that he has with the leaders. If we go all the way back to Genesis, we see where that idea comes from of a Sabbath. On the first day of creation, God created the light, and so on and so forth. The story goes of creation until you see God has spoken into existence or created by fashioning man and woman everything that is in 6 days. And it says on the seventh day, God ceased his work of creating. He had a Sabbath, he rested. That story carries forth. And there's no instruction about the requirements to observe a Sabbath or to keep this law until you get to about 1500 BC, when Moses is leading the people of Israel, and they've come out of Egypt, out of slavery. They come to Mount Sinai, and we get that moment where God gives to them the Ten Commandments. And we get this one in verse 8 that says of Exodus 20, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Why? Well, verse 11, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Rest and remember. Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? But how do you do that? We, as people, oftentimes complicate the very simple things that God asks us to do. I mean, the instructions simply says, don't work. Rest and reflect. How do you do that best? And so they began to establish laws to measure how well they were resting and reflecting. And so let me give you some of these things that they came up with. And this could go on, and it depends upon the rabbi and their interpretation, but some generally accepted guidelines were these. You could only walk 3,000 feet from your home on the Sabbath. Okay, that's just a little bit more than a half a mile. But since Sabbath was from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, if before sundown you would fix a plate of food and take it 2,999 feet from your kitchen and place it there before the Sabbath began, you established that as a part of your kitchen. And so you could go to that plate of food and on another 3,000 feet. If you didn't want to take a plate of food, all you needed to do was take a stick and place it across the pathway, or a rope maybe to cross the pathway, less than 3,000 feet from your home, and declare that as your gate. And it became an extension of your property, and you could go another 3,000 feet. You see how technical the issues became, how legalistic they became in outlining what is proper conduct. You could carry something that weighed as much as a fig. Well, that's not much. You could do that once a day. But you could carry half a fig twice a day. And if you picked it up in private but moved it to public, or from public to private, or from a narrow space to a wide space, or from an inside space to an outside space, from a large space to a small space, or a small space to a large space, it really, it factored into what you could do and follow the Sabbath law. Got to be careful what you eat. Now, if you put something into your mouth, that was okay. It depended upon the size and what it was, of course, but you couldn't spit something out of your mouth. That's work. And so, for instance, an olive. If you put an olive in your mouth and spit out the pit, that's work and it's measurable. And so you had to factor in how you ate your olives, which is a big part of their diet. All of this stuff is just one thing after another. You could throw an object up with your right hand and catch it with your right hand, but you couldn't throw it up with your right and catch it with your left, or throw it up with your left and catch it with your right. That's work. That's what they determined in their law. So you do things like start your food before the Sabbath. You can't start a fire on the Sabbath. That's work. So you start your food before. You prepare everything ahead of time so that when the Sabbath arrives, you're ready to not work. And heaven forbid that you find a fresh, new, and obvious gray hair on the Sabbath day, because you can't pluck it out. You got to know it's there until the Sabbath is over before you mess with it, because to pluck out a gray hair would be work. That stuff still continues today, lest you think it all has just passed and changed. Some of the things that we found when we were traveling, things like Sabbath elevators. Do you know, to push a button, to create the movement of electricity. Electricity requires a spark, right? It's fire. You create, by pushing a button, you create fire. So you cannot enter an elevator and push the button to open it. What they have done is they've got Sabbath elevators. They call them Shabbat elevators today. And so they just open and close on every floor automatically. So that's set to take place before the Sabbath begins, so that spark that is created by the impulse to open and close the door. You didn't create that, and thereby work on the Sabbath. Food, if you want to cook for the Sabbath day, you got to start it in a crock pot that you plug in before Sabbath begins, okay? Because you can do that before, and you can carry that through, but you can't start it on that day. Probably the funniest thing that we laugh about is at a kibbutz, there is a sign over the urinal. That's one of those auto flushing mechanisms that says to use this device. I forget exactly, I've got a picture of it, but I didn't figure that was appropriate to show. To use this device and cause that sensor to trigger that flushes the urinal on the Sabbath day is a sin, because by peeing, you're causing a spark, and that's a sin. Sabbath has become, and was in the day of Jesus, a very heavy burden. And I think there are two issues that we've got to understand that are taking place here. The first one is about control. It is about power and authority and who's in charge to say what is right and what is wrong. And the Pharisees are using this Sabbath instruction, this simple command of God to rest and reflect, to not work, they're using that as a way to be in power and control, to have authority over the people, to determine what is right and what is wrong. And they're just squeezing the life out of the people. So it's about power. The second one is about religion. Because we like to know where we stand. We like to know ultimately where we're at with God. And our righteousness, which is right standing with God, is determined in religion on the rights and the wrongs. And so how do you measure that? And the more specific you become, the more easy it is to measure where you stand, right or wrong, with God. And so it developed into this very burdensome system. When all it says in Exodus 20, verse 9 is, don't work. It's meant to be refreshing. Like, rest, take a walk, take a swim, spend some time with your family, break the rhythms and reflect upon God's provision. But it had become anything but refreshing. Probably some Jewish writers I read said it is the most burdensome, most difficult, most exhausting day of the week. So that's where we arrive in Luke 6. Luke's not arranging these two stories because of chronology. He's arranging them because of a point. And he wants us to see Jesus' direct confrontation with the teachers of the law, and particularly with this idea of self-righteousness through Sabbath keeping. One Sabbath, he says in verse 1, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them. Here's the problem. Rub them with their hands and eat the kernels. That's work. Now, there was prescription for this. If you read the Old Testament law, it is a part of the custom for people who are traveling about to be allowed to take some grain from the field, certain amounts, and to eat that as they traveled. But the problem here is they're doing it on the Sabbath. Some of the Pharisees asked, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Jesus answered them, have you not read? Sometimes in our eyes and our understanding, we miss underlying messages. This is just sarcasm overload right here. Jesus is asking the obvious. For sure they have read what David did when his companions were hungry. He entered the house of God, he says, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for the priests to eat. If you want to go back and read that story, it's in 1 Samuel chapter 21. David is fleeing right now the city of Jerusalem. He's just outside of it. He's fleeing for his life. He's been anointed as king. He's the presumed, picked by God king, but he's not yet assumed that throne. And his men are hungry. They go in to get some bread to eat. It was bread that was set aside as a part of the worship. It's called showbread. There's a couple of messages that Jesus is making here, okay? First of all, the message is, don't you understand that the law is not about law keeping? Mercy triumphs over law keeping. Compassion triumphs over that. And the message is the priest was compassionate to David and his men. He was merciful to them, and he allowed them to eat. But the second part of it is probably more significant, and that is this: he's the anointed king. So yes, he's allowed to take the bread. He is the one that God has selected. This is the king. And don't you see the message Jesus is communicating here? Jesus is saying to the Pharisees, listen, David was king. Who am I? Who am I? You say that it's okay that David took that bread to eat. Do you know who I am? Yeah, he's the King of Kings. Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. He's dropping a truth bomb on them. Guys, he says, you're not in charge. I'm the Lord. I'm the one who makes the rules. I'm the one who sets the law. I'm the one who gave the instruction to set aside a Sabbath. So he's confronting their religious power grabbing by saying, I'm the king. I'm the Lord. Then Luke gives us a second story. On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching. And a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. So the picture, the word here is it's withered up. So it's been unused long enough that there's atrophy. Now, that's a big deal, but it's not life-threatening. If it had been a life-threatening issue, it's okay, according to their Sabbath law, to intervene to keep someone from dying, but not to help someone. Like, if they're not going to bleed to death, you let them bleed. This right hand issue, it's not a new problem. It's a serious one, but it's not life-threatening, so it is of no reason that Jesus should work even on the Sabbath. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking, the verb there is just this intent focus. They're focusing upon Jesus, looking for a reason to accuse him. So they watched him closely to see if, and catch this is just ridiculous. Would he heal on the Sabbath? He's been healing all over the countryside. The number of miracles piling up. It's without argument that Jesus is doing things that nobody else can do. I mean, the power of God is obviously working in and through him, and he's doing things that they're unexplainable in human sense. But will he do it on the Sabbath? And it just blows my mind when I think of that mindset that is so fixated on law and self-righteousness and religion and authority and power and control, that you're willing to acknowledge there are miracles here. This man's doing miracles. But is he going to break our rules? Well, think about the irony of that. Wouldn't we be more overwhelmed by the fact that he's doing miracles than we are concerned about his breaking of the Sabbath? That's what happens, though, when we become religious in our focus. Jesus knew what they were thinking. That's a scary thought, isn't it? Not just with them, by the way, it's with us as well. He knew what they were thinking. And he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful?" A little sarcasm again. He's asking them. He's already told them, okay, the previous story. He's the one who sets the rules. He's the Lord of the Sabbath. But I'm asking you, he says, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. To do good, to save, that's what's lawful. But they can't answer that, because to answer in that way would be giving him permission to do what they're trying to catch him doing, and that's helping a man by doing a miracle on the Sabbath. And so they can't respond. In verse 10, he looks around at them all and says to the man, there's kind of like a dramatic pause. Like, think it over, guys. Where are you going to go with this answer? Where are you going to go with this direction for me? Should I do good? Should I do evil? Should I heal? Should I do harm? He says to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and his hand was completely restored. So the atrophy that had developed over time is eliminated. It's a miracle. It's without any question, without any, there's no reasoning to explain this away. It's obviously a miracle. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law were furious. They're filled with rage. The word there describes, they just flipped out. They're totally consumed by anger because he's done this on the Sabbath. He's done a miracle. He healed the man. He restored this man's hand. He healed him. And they're furious because he did it on the Sabbath. And they began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. So there's two levels of understanding taking place here as Jesus is questioning them. What is right? What is wrong? There's a question here about what is right and what is wrong. But the second level of it is really where he digs at them, and why in verse 11 they determine they want to do away with him. And that is, he's setting out who is right and who is wrong. Am I right for being compassionate and loving and helpful to this man? Or are you in your evil and your determination to do away with me, to kill me? Who's right before God? You or me? Which of these attitudes would please God. I did a video in a place called Chorazin, a synagogue in Chorazin, and was able to sit in the seat of Moses that is there, the person who presides over the things of the synagogue that day was there. And I, as I was there, kind of imagined this dramatic confrontation taking place here in this story. Let's watch this video. I'm in Chorazin. It's ruined now. It's just stacks of rocks. This is an old synagogue, and I'm actually sitting in a bema seat that was found here. This is a replica of the original that's now in Jerusalem, but this sat here as the place where whoever was presiding over the synagogue that day would sit. Very concerned with the law, with the keeping of the rules. And I think this story of the man with the withered hand in particular could have happened right here. And the person sitting in this seat was watching Jesus to see if he would break the rules. It's interesting to me. They're not questioning whether Jesus has the power to heal. They're questioning how he will use his power and whether or not he will follow their law. You know, it's so easy for us to switch back and forth between our relationship with Jesus and our earning our way before God, our trying to follow rules and keep score and be better than we are bad in order to please him, which is a losing game. It's impossible. And Jesus doesn't come to destroy all those laws, but he comes to fulfill our inadequacy in keeping them. He's perfect. And he's not breaking the Sabbath law of God. He's breaking the Sabbath law added on by men. God sent him, and he's doing God's will in fulfilling the law, showing them how to live in perfection, showing them that helping their fellow man is better than not healing on the Sabbath. It's easy for us to keep score. Don't get caught in that trap. Seek and pursue your righteousness through Christ, and don't judge. Don't spend your time evaluating others and their righteousness before God, but proclaim the message of the gospel, which is grace and mercy through Christ and Christ alone. I don't ever want to be that person who is so caught up in my way, my righteousness, that I miss the presence of God. Yet to imagine having Jesus in your midst and totally miss him. What a sad story. You know, that's so easy for us to do. That's so easy for us to be so focused on us and our way and our thing and our plan and our agenda that we miss the presence of God. Even when we're trying to do good, we can miss the presence of God in our midst. We've been out for about 12 weeks, out of the building, unable to gather for worship. About a month ago, our elders started talking about opening up again on the 7th of June. When that discussion began, it was still questionable as to how that fit within the parameters of all the guidelines that were being given to us. And so what we had to wrestle with and debate was why? Why would we need to gather? Why is it of such importance that we gather? I can't tell you how many times I've been asked that question. When are we going to get together again? Why do we need to do that? A lot of options are laid on the table. You know, for some folks, I think it's to show the governor that we think he is wrong, that we think that this is governmental overreach and an inappropriate intrusion into personal freedoms. Is that a good reason? For some, it's to prove that I've got faith to face down any opposition that might come my way. Just watch me. I'll be in the building worshiping. Is that a good why? For some, I think it's because that's what we're comfortable with. That's just what we've always done. And so that's what we want to do. It's been a difficult season. It's been trying and stressful, and At times I've had to fight through depression and anger and all kinds of emotions about these issues. All the while I'm asking myself, why? What lessons can I learn in this time that's so different than anything we've ever experienced before? What does God want from us here? The why matters. I've seen people through the years make gathering together in worship and what it is and what happens to be like the Sabbath law. I mean, we look at and we listen to these instructions about what the Pharisees had done and we say, how ridiculous is that? But then I've seen fights in churches through the years over what kind of music are we going to have? And people just getting all bent out of shape over instrumentation and arrangement and style and fighting about those things. And, you know, if you change the order, if you change the style, if you change the song, you turn the lights on or off, or if you alter the building, and I think sometimes we become so focused on what we do. We forgot the why we do it. And when that happens, we miss, or we're at risk of missing, God in our midst. And we can do all this work for him, but he's not allowed to work in us and through us. Traditions and rituals and all that stuff becomes our focus when we drive towards religion. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that person that becomes so focused on what is about me that I miss the presence of God. Jesus said quite simply in Matthew chapter 11, "Come to me, those of you who are heavy burdened, those of you who need a rest, and I'll provide that for you. I'll give you rest," he said. "I'll give you a Sabbath." Why do we meet? I believe we meet to celebrate what God has done and what God is doing in and through us and what we believe God is going to do in the future. We meet to celebrate. We meet to be encouraged. You know, in Hebrews 11, it tells us not to forsake meeting together as some fall into the habit of doing, but meet for the purpose of encouragement, to lift each other up. When we're out there by ourselves, when we're on our own, if we go that way very long, we can drift away, right? So we meet together to encourage each other. I hope you're encouraged. And we meet to be equipped, because our battle is out there in the world where we see a strong enemy waging war against the message of the gospel. And we're called to go and to share. And we meet together to be encouraged and equipped so that we're prepared to go and to share the message of God and his truth with the world. Well, that's going to be opposed by those who like religion. But that's where God's at in his leading of us. They say in verse 11, let's figure out a way to get rid of him. And they plot. Beginning from here, they plot. And in 2 years, they accomplish the task. And they get rid of Jesus for a moment. Why do we meet? Why are we gathering to worship? I'm glad that we can. I'm glad that we have that opportunity to be encouraged and to celebrate and to be equipped. Let's make sure, no matter what we do, we focus on him, that we give him honor, and that we celebrate his presence in our lives. Let's pray. Father, we thank you. Thank you for sending Jesus to our sinful, broken, fallen world. Thank you for coming in such a simple way, living in righteousness, providing a sacrifice of perfection for us. Father, help us to celebrate Jesus. Help us to follow Jesus and not be caught up in all the rules and regulations and practices that can come with that, and not allow any of that to distract us from you and honoring you. Father, thank you for Jesus. We gather to worship him. In his name we pray. Amen.
Well, hey, as we move into a time of communion, it's an incredible time that we get to celebrate what God has done on our behalf through Jesus. It's a time that we can remember that Jesus has paid the price for us, that we are brought into the family of God because of what Christ has done, that he went to the cross, paid the price for our sins, and God raised him on the third day. We get to celebrate that together. So grab those supplies, spend a few minutes remembering and contemplating what God has done for us, thanking him for what God has done for us, and take that communion with us this week. It's an incredible time to remember it's not just a religious activity that we participate in, but it's a true remembrance of what God is doing in and through us.
We are starred on the outside looking in. This is where grace begins. We were hungry, we were thirsty, with nothing left to give, or the shape that we were in. And just when our hopes seem lost, love opened the door for us. He said, come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come meet this motley crew of misfits, these liars and these thieves. There's no one unwelcome here. And that sin and shame that you brought with you, you can leave it at the door and let mercy draw you near. Come to the table. Come join the sinners who have been redeemed. Take your place beside the Savior. Sit down and be set free. Come to the table. Come to the table. To the thief and to the doubter, to the hero and the coward, to the prisoner and the soldier, to the young and to the older, all who conquer all